Morbius, more like Snorbius. Hi everyone, this is
Josh.
and today we're going to talk about the new Sony Stupid Universe film, Morbius. As a quick warning, this video will contain some spoilers for this film. I don't think anyone really cares, but if you do, then maybe go to this point in the video so you can avoid those spoilers. There's your warning. 3, 2, 1, thank you. This film was written by Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless. Is that a real name? It was directed by Daniel Espinosa. This is the third film in the Sony Spider-Man universe. I didn't see the last entry being Venom, Let There Be Carnage because no thanks. I had already suffered enough from watching the first film, Venom, which was a uniquely bad hot mess with a bizarre and sometimes hilarious performance from Tom Hardy. Morbius is very similar to Venom, but somehow finds a way to be even more generic and boring. Morbius follows Michael Morbius, yes, his last name is Morbius, who sets out to find a cure for his rare blood illness. What better way to do that than to become a fucking vampire? Anyway, things happen, no one cares, including Sony, and that's the plot. This is one of those films that is just fodder for video essayists to make a 2-hour, 3-hour long video detailing everything that's wrong with it. Watching Morpheus is like the equivalent of eating, like, I don't know, a fucking saltine cracker sandwich. It has no flavor or personality. I guess I'll start with the awful casting. I have no idea why Sony thought it would be a good idea for Jared Leto of all people to be the lead. This is the same actor who's known for giving weird, out there performances for better or worse, but the character he's playing is so lame and uncharismatic. I'd rather see a spin-off of Jared Leto's ridiculous character from House of Gucci than watching him play this boringly written doctor. Tyrese Gibson is another example. He plays a detective who does mostly nothing the entire film. It's kind of weird and awkward seeing him try to do a serious role when he's known for playing the comic relief who likes to yell a lot in the Fast and Furious films. The only choice I think they got right here was Matt Smith, who like always brings a lot of energy and charisma to his performance as the villain. Really liked him in Last Night in Soho. Probably gonna see him in a lot more villain roles in the future. One of the only scenes in the entire movie that stands out to me is when he's dancing in front of a mirror getting dressed to this corny ass music. It's a stupid moment, but at least it had some kind of spice and feeling to it. Morbius plays out like any other superhero or anti-hero movie you've watched, with seemingly no attempt to try to make it feel different, or at least try to come at the story from a different angle. For as terrible as Venom was, at least it kind of tried to embrace its silly and weird buddy humor to some extent, which made it occasionally enjoyable, I guess. I'm not saying Morbius has to be funny necessarily, but it could have tried to at least lean into being a horror film, given that it's vampires that we're dealing with, but there's only like one horror sequence in a hospital hallway. The scene is stupid and tropey, but it felt appropriate, and it's one of the only visually creative moments in the film. What also undermines the horror element is Sony's reluctance to show violence. It is a little bit bloodier than Venom, but it's still annoyingly tame for the most part, where you're seeing a lot of light blood or just light violence here and there, making it feel like Sony is treating us like babies.
Yeah, you know what? Let's cut down on the violence. Instead of just making a shitty film for adults, we'll make a shitty film for kids as well.
But wait, there's more BS. There's just so many parts about Morbius that are so derivative. There's a cringy line of dialogue that kind of says it all when Morbius says, "You wouldn't like me when I'm hungry." The big conflict of this film boils down to, what are you willing to do to save the people that you love? But the film doesn't really put any effort into trying to explore that idea in a meaningful way. It's just all very surface level. A lot of the commentary just boils down to, I'm privileged and need to try to responsibly embrace my powers. Gee, that sounds familiar. To make matters worse, the film somehow, despite its decent-sized budget, is just so technically incompetent. The cinematography is standard, the score sounds like it was ripped off from the Nolan Batman films, the CGI really got on my nerves. The film likes to do this thing like every single action scene where it goes super slow-mo for a moment and has that cinematic bass drop that's like in every single fucking trailer. It's almost like these action scenes were too boring, and so the executives were like,
you know what we need more of? We need more.
The editing is so bad that I honestly wouldn't be surprised if someone told me that the executives just cut the film themselves. At the beginning, the film has a flashback sequence that's meant to set up the relationship between Morbius and his friend Lucian, or Milo as he calls him for some reason. It's hard to explain everything that's wrong about this scene without showing it, but the film starts with Milo meeting Morbius when they're kids. They're both in these beds talking to each other, and then suddenly their clothes change, like time has passed, but the passage of time isn't communicated. It just cuts from them wearing one thing to another thing. There's nothing done in between that shows the motivation of why their clothes have suddenly changed, the time of day hasn't changed, like, it just carries on as if they just magically change clothes instantly. And the entire flashback sequence continues to do this, where it just jumps through time without sufficiently establishing what's going on, where the characters are, and what emotions I'm supposed to be feeling. There's another terribly edited sequence that ignores physics, where Morbius is being chased by Tyrese Gibson in the ground floor lobby of the super tall building. Morbius flies up the staircase to get to the rooftop to escape. He's only up there for a moment, and then suddenly Tyrese Gibson shows up with his gun drawn. I remember watching that and being like, excuse me, is there an elevator that helped you get up here this fast? The physics of every movie usually tends to be off, but there are certain severities of like bad physics, and Morbius pushes this particular scene to the extreme. The funniest editing error by far is when characters will say certain things that don't match up with what their mouth is saying. This happens at least 2 or 3 times. It was like watching a terrible dub from like one of those old Godzilla films. Honestly, Morbius would have probably been a much more entertaining movie if the entire thing was just a bad lip reading. Now, if we are being fair to Sony, Morbius was supposed to be released in the summer of 2020, ahead of both Venom 2 and Spider-Man No Way Home, but of course, COVID screwed that up, and Morbius ended up premiering after both of those films. And I think part of the reason why the editing is so bad may have to do with Sony cutting out certain references or information from the original pre-COVID timeline that may have not lined up with the current timeline. I'm totally willing to grant some of the editing struggles to circumstances outside of Sony's control, but I'm having a really hard time believing that that was the only reason why the editing is so atrocious. Morbius reminds me of like an old school 2000s superhero movie like Ghost Rider, when studios still didn't know how to properly execute a superhero film like Marvel does now. If Sony was smart, they would just focus on making the animated Spider-Verse movies and just let Marvel have the keys to the car with all the live action adaptation superhero stuff and split the profits, because Sony just can't help but embarrass themselves every time they try to do a live action adaptation of a Spider-Man villain. Why have Morbius when you can have less BS? Please don't waste your time seeing this. It's terrible, just like you would expect. I'm going to give Morbius a 1 out of 5. Thanks for watching me roast the shit out of Morbius, everyone. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. Feel free to leave a recommendation on a film, TV show, or subject that I should discuss next while you're down there. I still plan on releasing a video about the sound treatment I'm doing for my studio and the office here. I know I've already talked about this twice in 2 other videos. It's gonna happen, I promise. It's just a long video and requires a lot of time. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and hit the bell for notifications so you can help me in the algorithm, and you also know when I drop the next video. Thanks again, everyone. I will see you later, and until then, take it easy and be well. Bye.